Welcome to part 2 of my two-part building a welcome email tutorial. Last week in part 1, we built an SMTP email library so that we had a mechanism to send emails for our yet-to-be-built welcome email component. This week, we're going to build the welcome email component so that we'll be able to send emails to all the users that registered with our application. Now, a lot of this is going to seem very familiar, especially if you watched my gigantic 11+ hour tutorial on event sourcing. There won't be a lot that's new, given that the mechanics of event sourcing and message processing are pretty much the same from component to component. Go ahead and watch the previous tutorial if you're interested in how to build event sourced components in general. Otherwise, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the material and not delve too deeply into things like tests and controls and such on stuff we've already covered. Luckily for us, there are a few wrinkles with this component that will make it necessary to do things slightly differently from before. And of course, I'll go into more detail in those areas. Okay, let's open up our project repositories. Most of the time when new features are added, especially in a Ruby development context, you'll add new code to the Rails controller or maybe a Rails model. This goes on for some time as more and more new features are added until so many new things have been added that it becomes this big ball of mud. Or you'll extract the code to a new quote unquote service object. That's a whole other can of worms I won't get into here. We use all of these strategies because at the center of our application is a monolith, and most developers just aren't good at developing monoliths. One of the advantages of event sourcing and distributed systems in general is that we don't have to do that. Each service is autonomous and able to stand on its own. So by using the mechanisms of our message store, namely PubSub, as well as with an understanding of the basic contracts between our different services and components, we can add new features without even touching any of the old code. In our new component, we'll be subscribing to the registration component. We'll be looking out for registered events and processing those events for our welcome email component. When we process those messages, we'll send out email to the registered email address. And we do all of this without having to modify our original registration component. In my past tutorials, I've been skimming over the building of a project skeleton, but I suppose I'll go ahead and slow down so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to make a project directory and go into it, initialize the Git repository. Okay, then I go ahead and create a README. I'll go ahead and commit that. A lot of this is good old copy and paste. So we'll copy this git ignore. And we'll copy this license file. And this gem spec. But we'll go ahead and rename this one. And modify this a little bit. And our dependencies are going to be a little bit different. We're going to need the registration client. And we're also going to need the SMTP email library that we built last week. And of course, we want test bench. We're going to want a gem file. And this needs to be changed to registration client at the registration component with the gem SMTP email at the path SMTP email. Now let's copy the install gems script. Let's copy these settings, this script here, this script here, this script here, and this script here. In our settings file, we don't really want to use the same user as our registration component. I like to keep things separate and differentiated. So let's go ahead and create a new role in our database registration service project. So let's go to our terminal, open a new window, and go to the database registration service project. Then we need to add a sketch script by doing sketch add roles welcome email component, and we'll write a message for role for welcome email component. Okay, so a couple of scripts were created. Let's go ahead and do that. We go here to deploy, and all we really need to do is just copy what's in here. And then paste. And then let's edit this to welcome email component. We want to copy this and paste it here. Same with the verify script. Okay, let's go back to our terminal, and we just run sketch deploy. Although I think the database isn't on yet, so let's go ahead and turn it on. And then we do sketch deploy. And the changes were deployed. I can confirm this by going to pSQL, my host, my role. I just use Postgres here, and then message store. Oh, sorry about that. I need to capitalize this. Then I can list all users and their roles by doing du. Whoops, sorry. Let's go ahead and turn on this. Do that again. And as we can see, the welcome email component has the roles of message store reader and message store writer. Now we want to use that role in our settings file here. So let's change this to welcome email component. Next, I want to copy the init file here and the load path. And I want to change this to require welcome email component. And this will be the welcome email component in the lib directory. So I'll do lib welcome email component.rb. And the load path basically just loads the gems from my bundler standalone loader, which is that gems bundler setup. You don't see it anywhere here because I haven't installed gems yet, but I'll do that momentarily. Next, I want to copy this test directory. And I want to update this to be registration. Oops, nope. I want this to be welcome email component controls. And I want to require the registration client controls. And I want to change this to welcome email component. I want to delete this. Everything looks good here. I don't need all these tests from the previous project, so I can delete this safely. And then this database connection test looks fine. Now, let's go ahead and chmod our scripts. Oh, whoops, I'm in the wrong. I'm in the wrong directory. Oh, I think there's one script I forgot to install or copy, rather. Let's see, we want to copy this. And we need to change it, yes. Okay, I think that's correct. Okay, now let me go ahead and run the install gems script with the posture of development. Okay, there's a typo here. Let me try that again. Excellent. And now I think I can run the test script, but before that, I need to add a controls file. This is just so that the test init file will be able to find this require. And of course, I forgot that I need to require event-tied Postgres. Let me run the test script again. And it works. Okay, let's go ahead and commit all this to a project skeleton commit. And for our database registration service, let's go ahead and do that as well. Like I said before, with any new component, I like to start development with the entity because our business logic is encompassed entirely within the entity. So our first problem we need to address here that we didn't need to with previous components is idempotence. Now, previously we did code in idempotence protections and concurrency protections, but now we're dealing with third-party external systems, and email is inherently not idempotent. We can't know that an email was successfully sent. Now, this is a bit abstract, so let's imagine that we have our handler for an idempotent operation. We already have an example available to us with our registration view data component. Let's just go right from the beginning to the end of the handler. We fetch the entity from the store. Next, we execute the insert registered operation, which is just a PostgreSQL insert. Finally, we write our event. Now let's think about what could go wrong here. Many developers will assume that success is normal or guaranteed within their systems and that failure is an anomaly. But in any distributed system, or even a monolith, but especially distributed systems, We cannot assume success. We must assume failure at every turn and prepare countermeasures. At each line of code, something could go wrong in the course of normal operations. Perhaps our external resource is unavailable due to a network failure. Perhaps a kill signal was sent to our process. Perhaps someone accidentally unplugged the machine. Anything can happen and will happen in your production systems, and we need to be cognizant of these things. So let's see what could potentially happen. First, let's go over what happens at the very edges, before the handler is run and after the handler is run. Before the handler is run, if we encounter an error, our handler will simply restart and process messages from its last position or bookmark. Nothing surprising there or anything to worry about. After our handler is run, we already know what will happen because we built in protection specifically for those cases. After the event was written to the message store and on subsequent reprocessing of messages, our condition here will check the entity, and in that case, the message here will be ignored. Let's go over what could go wrong between these two boundaries. At store.fetch, the message store could be unavailable, meaning we would not be able to fetch any entities. However, the result is the same as if the handler had failed before it was run, so this is nothing our handler can't handle. Next, the view data database could be unavailable, and therefore the insert statement would fail. However, again, the component would restart and reprocess. We would refetch any entities from the store, but this would have no impact on our handler because the insert statement hasn't yet been executed and the event hasn't yet been written. In other words, no side effects have yet to be run. And finally, the message store could be unavailable at the time that we write the event. Now, after a component restart, the entity would be refetched from the message store. And because the event was not written, the condition here would fail. The insert statement to the registrations table would be re-executed. This might result in a Postgres error if there's a primary key constraint on the table. But because of the way the view data Postgres package is written, errors upon insert are ignored. So this insert is effectively idempotent because the side effect is actuated once. And then the event is written to the message store. So as we can see, this handler is fully idempotent. Reprocessing messages due to any sort of failure will not make our system actuate side effects more than once. But let's now imagine that this is our welcome email component, and replace the insert operation with a send email operation. If our message store fails when we write our event here, we can see that this will cause problems for us. The send email operation could potentially be run an infinite number of times if the message store is unavailable. We would continue to reprocess messages, sending emails, and then attempting to write our event into the message store, only to fail and have to reprocess the message again. Meaning multiple emails could be sent to our recipients before an event is finally written when our message store is brought back online. So what do? We need to implement a two-phase commit protocol. Before we send our email, but after we fetch from the message store, we write a started event. And then after we send our email, we write a completed event to the message store. Our condition here will then query the entity to make sure it has a started and completed time. If it does, the handler ignores the message. Otherwise, the handler will continue forward as normal. If the handler fails its execution at any point after writing the started event, and the handler tries to reprocess the message, say the send email operation fails, or the completed event isn't written to the message store, this condition will cause the handler to ignore the message on any subsequent reprocessing. So we'll have orphaned started events without their accompanying completed events. This means we have at most once delivery of our email, whereas before we would have at least once delivery. Now, depending on your use case, you might be fine with either at most once delivery or at least once delivery. You need to determine that for yourself. But you must also realize you can only have one or the other. And you cannot have any guaranteed exactly once delivery. Given the mechanics of messaging systems and the laws of physics in general, it's physically impossible, i.e., see the two generals problem. The only way to guarantee exactly once delivery is not from our own systems, but from the third-party system itself. The third-party system would need their own idempotence check, so that it wouldn't even matter how many times we send the same message to them. They would only actuate their side effects on their side once. But we usually have zero control over whether they've taken idempotence into account in their systems. Some third-party services are good about this and have an idempotence key that we can use. If that's the case, then we wouldn't need a two-phase commit. Otherwise, we're stuck with imperfect solutions. Let's go ahead and implement a two-phase commit protocol for our welcome email component. I'll delete this. So we need to include schema data structure. And we want to set our attributes. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to copy this from registration component. Okay, so we have ID, user ID, and email address. We're going to need an initiated time and a sent time. And then we're going to need a startup time. And a completed time. Next, I want to write a test for our two-phase commit. So we want to have a single predicate that will test whether the entity has a start time or a completed time. And if it has either one of those, then it will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. Oopsie. Okay, so we have our test written, but we need controls here. And I think we can copy a lot of that from our registration component. I don't think we need this. We'll leave this for now. So we have initiated, yes. This one needs to be changed. Okay. And then this will be our started. And this will have a started time. This will be our completed, which will have a completed time. And this will be our sent time. Now, if we go test this, obviously it's going to fail because we don't have, well, we don't have our controls properly loading. So we need to change this to the correct path. Let's try that again. And I think I forgot to rename this control entity. I don't know what that was about. Okay. Our entity itself is not being properly loaded. Okay. Here the tests fail because we don't have a predicate method defined. So let's define it. And I think we decided that if the entity has a start time or a completed time, then this will return true. And that should do it. Excellent. Now I'm going to go ahead and speed through the next couple of tests because we've already done this before in previous tutorials. Okay, let me try and test this. Excellent. I think I can go ahead and commit this. Now let's move on to messages. From our entity, we can tell we'll have an initiated event, a started event, a completed event, and a sent event. And we don't really need commands because we'll be subscribing to the registration component's registered event. So let me go ahead and copy these messages from the registration component. I'm just trimming the fat here. Okay, so let's go over this one by one. The initiated event will be subscribed to the registered event from the registration component and write an initiated event in response. The reason I deleted the process time is that I want the initiated time's effective time to be its own thing. Same with the started event and with the completed event. Now with the sent event, I'm thinking that the effective time will be based on the completed event's time, and the process time is here to let us know when the sent event was written to the message store. Let's add these loaders files. And of course, I think we're going to need controls for this. So let's copy them. And let's just modify these a little bit. Actually, I think I want to leave these to be registration because the ID is based on the registration ID, and we don't really have the concept of a welcome email ID. So let me change this a little and remove this. and copy some things that we might need. We want an ID and we want an email address, but we don't need anything else for our registration. For our user, not much here has to change. We do need to load these files. Oops, I put them in the wrong place. Okay. I think we want this below that one. Now we can say this is correct. Actually, let me go put this below this one. This all looks correct. Let's go to sent. We will need a process time for our sent event. But I think on the whole, this is it. And then completed. And let's go ahead and load those control events. Just testing just to make sure I didn't break anything. Next, we want to work on our projection. But like before, we can just copy these projection tests from the registration component. Let's just modify these. Beyond that, I think this looks fine. Although, wait, let me go check that again. Yeah, I need to change this to welcome email. Just doing another spot check here. Okay. And then here. whoops. I just started a new thing without checking. Okay. Let me just finish this. Let's see. Okay, I think all these tests are correct and they all pretty much fail because we don't have a projection. Actually, what am I doing? Of course, I'm just going to copy it from the registration component. All right, let us change these. I'm just going to keep these the same, but I want to do something different for initiated, which I'll go into a little bit later. Okay, so what I like to do when I have a huge block of attributes that I need to set is use the set attributes library, which is an event-tied toolkit library. So instead of this, so what I'll do is use set attributes. What this does is take a receiver and a source. The receiver is the welcome email, and the source is the initiated event. Now, upon actuation, the set attributes library will assign all values from the source to the corresponding attributes of the receiver. And we can also define which attributes we want to set in an array of symbols with the copy keyword argument. User ID and email address. And we can also specify whether one attribute corresponds to another. So here we have ID, and we want to set that with registration ID. So we use a hash and say registration ID will be set to ID. Let's go ahead and test this. Excellent. All the tests pass. Let me go ahead and commit all of this. Let me go ahead and grab the handlers that I need. need this command, but I do need this. Okay. And then we want to change the category to welcome email. And we want to subscribe to the registered event. And we're all right. Went to fetch, and I'm going to check that it's initiated. Registration ID, user ID, that's fine. Stream name. I think we don't need processed time. We're setting time, not process time. And we're going to write the initiated event. Okay. Let's go ahead and grab some tests for that. So let's go and do this. Now we don't have any need for a correlation stream, so I think we can just delete that. We're going to need a version file for our controls. Okay, I think this should be correct. Let me go and test this. Okay, we do have some errors on all three tests. We don't have any handlers loaded up, so we need to do that. We also need a store, of course. Now let's go ahead and test that. Uninitialized constant registration on handlers, registrations, events, line 22. Ah, yes. I need to load up the registration client. Okay, this is better. We have less failures. Undefined local variable or method claimed on line 36. Ah. Okay. I think I need to check the contract for the message registered event. Okay, there's no process time. Oopsie, my mistake. So I can just delete this. And test. Undefined method process time. Oh, sorry, that's line 54 on the test itself. Aha. There we go. Okay, the only thing that is failing is this version test. Oh, I see what happened. This needs to be set to new. Otherwise, it's just ignoring this. Okay. No? Okay. Ah. Now we need to send. This was correct, but I didn't go far enough. I need to actually set the handler's entity here to be the registered registration ID. There we go. Now, the reason for that is the new control doesn't have any ID assigned. So when you add it to the store based on the welcome email.id, it just adds it to the store as a blank or nil, I believe. So we can't fetch it based on the registered events registration ID. Okay. Let me go ahead and commit this. Okay, let's go ahead and handle the initiated event. I'm going to go ahead and copy handler for us to use. Oops, I already copied that. this. Or nor do I need this. Right. I need to delete this. Okay. So this is very similar to a handler we've already done before, but we need to write 2 events now and not 1. We also need to be very careful about the expected version we send to our writer, but I'll go ahead and show you the code. Grab the registration ID. And then fetch the entity. If the welcome email started to phase commit, then we ignore it. Let me go ahead and grab the log message from here. Okay, so here's what I was talking about. We need to be very careful about what the expected version is. Oops, I made a mistake here. When we fetch the welcome email entity from the store, we receive the version. So the next event we write must be that version. But we also need to write a second event. That means the expected version should be this version plus 1. We also need to take into account that some tests won't have any entities in the store, so there'll be a no stream or -1 version. In that case, next version will equal to 1. Okay, and then of course we send the email. But before we do that, let's write the tests for what we just did. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Okay, So let's do the expected version tests first. I expect this will be much the same. I think that's correct. Let's go ahead and test that. Oh, whoops. I need to set the automated init file to one level deeper. Let's fix that. Line 49. Oh, whoops. Okay. All right, excellent. Now let's look at the completed expected version test. We need to do this also. Okay, I think this test looks good. We're testing to see that the next version, or the version +1, was written to the stream. Yeah, looks good. All right, so let's go ahead and finish up those other tests. Let's test that. Excellent. And this one. Oh, right. Excellent. Let's continue with the rest. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Now that we have this done, I'm going to go ahead and finish up with the event handlers by handling the completed event to output a sent event. And then I'll circle back to the, what is that? I'll circle back here to the send email. I don't need this. And I don't think we need it here. Yeah, we don't have it here. Nor do we have it. Do we have it in the complete? Yes, we do. But do I need that? No, it's not here. Okay, I don't know why it's... Oh, I see. It's the expected version test. Sorry, I had a little brain fart. Let's see. What is this? Whoopsie. That was a bad typo. I hope I didn't repeat it. Nope. Okay, good. I do need, actually, I do need this. So let me go ahead and undo all this that I did. Yeah. And I'll start over. Okay. That looks good. That looks good. Okay, that all looks good. And of course, I forgot to update this. And probably here too. Yeah. All right, all those tests fail. I think I do need to, let me just close all this. Okay, let us go ahead and handle the completed event. And I think I can just paste. Okay, we're processing the completed event. Okay, I think this is correct. And all of our tests pass. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. Okay. So we need to actually send the email here. But before we do that, I don't know if you remember last week, but our SMTP email library requires a settings file. So we're going to have to create some custom settings for our welcome email component. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll change this to welcome email. We'll update the get ignore. And then we update this. And then we copy all of this. Excellent. And then we need our SMTP. And then we can copy the settings here. Copy. Paste. Excellent. And we'll copy this. Paste. And we'll change this back to message store. Okay. Now, what next? We need to create a settings file. And we already have a prime example here in the registration view data component. I'll copy these settings and session. I don't think we actually need this here. Welcome email component settings path. There we go. Okay, let's go add this here. And let's add a sessions file. Okay. And I think this is correct. So we need to also change this database connection. Session build. And let's go ahead and test that what I did was actually correct. Okay, excellent. So now we have our settings and we have our session. I think we also need to, let's check the gem spec to see if we have our SMTP library. Okay, we do. Now we need to actually require it. And we'll need to set a dependency. And we want to pass in a settings file. Okay, first we need to grab the welcome email component settings from the settings.instance singleton. Then we need to grab the hash here to SMTP settings data. And then we need to build a settings file. And then we pass it in. And I think this should work. But let's go ahead and test that by test subject, test body. Yes. Actually, is that correct? Let me go check. Correct. SMTP email. So let's test this, but before we do, I want to set this. Actually, I'll just go ahead and copy this here and see what happens on an IRB session. Okay, here we need to change this to welcome email component. Okay, that seems to work. Yes. Okay, that is correct. And then here we don't want to use a configure, we want to use build. Let's say recipient. Sender, test subject, and test body. Okay, I believe our mail catcher is running, and it does look like that the message was sent, but let's go check our browser. Yes, we have our previous messages from our tutorial last week, but we also have a message that we just sent today. So this appears to be correct. So let's go ahead and get more variables out of our event. Okay, now in order to test this, let's go ahead and go, oh, let's close this. Let's go ahead and go to the test directory, handle events, initiated. Let's copy this and paste it at the root here. And we'll test SMTP email. So we don't need a process time. We do want this. We'll keep these. And I don't really care about the writer. Now, if you recall, last week we created a sent predicate on our SMTP email substitute, which will allow us to observe what is being passed through to this class. So I believe we can just copy this and paste it. We are expecting sent to equal email address. And I'll just rename this to 2 so it's more clear. And we're expecting this to equal sender@example.com. And we're expecting this to equal welcome. And we don't have one for body. I don't remember why we didn't add it, but we didn't. But that's something that's easily fixable, but I'm not going to fix it now. Okay, we need to grab the SMTP email substitute from our handler. And this should work. All right, looks like it worked. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and commit these to the project repository. Okay, now we need our consumers. So we need to change the identifier to welcome email. And to see why, look at my earlier tutorial on snapshots. And then we want to load these. Excellent. And then we want a start class. And we want to delete that. I'm going to change this to registration. This one's changed to welcome email. We don't have a correlation to worry about. Now we also need to pass in settings here, and we can just do it like this, the way it's done here. And settings. So let's go ahead and test this component. So if we look in our message store database, actually let me check. We do X auto and we see that we already have a registered event in the message store. So let's go ahead and run our welcome email component. I think I forgot to, yeah. Okay, let's try that again. Uninitialized constant registration component start. Uh-oh. Did I? Yeah, I did. Okay, let's try again. Okay, cannot read settings from message store Postgres. .json. Let's go ahead and check this out. Okay, I think I know what's going on. Let me go look at the handlers. Ah, I see. Yes. So I'm not actually using our session here. So I need to go ahead and do that. And on the store as well. And we need to update the registration events handler as well. Okay, let's see how that works. Oh, look, we have some log activity. It looks like a welcome email was started and then completed, and then a sent event was written to the message store. Let's go ahead and check our mail catcher. And as we can see, we have an email from sender@example.com to jane@example.com with the subject of welcome and a body of welcome to the application, just as we were expecting. I also want to check the message store so that we can see the events that were written. So as we can see, we have a sent event that was written at the very top. It was preceded by a completed event, which was preceded by a started event, and was preceded by an initiated event, which was in turn preceded by the registered event from the registration component, which kicked it all off. So I'm going to stop this component, and I want to clear the tables here so that we can run another test. And of course, I need to write a command message to the message store. So what I want to do now is demonstrate at most once delivery by placing an error in send email. So between the started event and the completed event, I want to cause an error to happen. And now we're going to start our component. And as you can see, an error occurred during the execution of the component. Now, if we try to fix the error and rerun the component to reprocess those messages, we can see that the component no longer goes forward. It ignores the initiated event. And if we go into the message store, we see that we only have a started event at the top, and we don't have any completed events on any reprocessing of the initiated event. So this is at most once delivery. we can either have 0 or 1 emails sent to our recipients. Now, just for fun, I want to go ahead and do a full end-to-end demonstration of this feature. We're going to run all of the resources necessary from our single page application to all the various components. So I've cleared the tables. I'm going to have to restart these components. And our registration view data component. And our web single page application. Okay, let me zoom in here a little bit. And let me inspect the console. Let me go ahead and set Jane at example.com and register. Oh, whoops. I forgot to run the registration resource. All right, let's go ahead and try that again. Okay, registration was successful. And if we go to our mail catcher, we have a new email with the expected data. Sender at example.com to Jane at example.com with the subject of welcome and a body of welcome to the application. So let's recap. Last week, we built an SMTP library that we could control and observe. We did this so we could use it as a dependency in our own components. This week, we built a welcome email component that subscribed to messages from the registration component. And using the SMTP library, we sent welcome emails to any users that had registered with our application. Oh, that's all I've got for today. The code will be available on GitHub if you need it. If you have any questions for me, be sure to check out my website, josephchoe.com. I'm also on the social networks, Twitter, GitHub, and such. Thank you very much.